The first time I saw her, she was just a shadow in the rain, a golden blur standing at the edge of my porch, her fur soaked, her ribs showing through her thin frame. At first, I thought she was just another stray. God knows they wander these roads all the time out here in Tennessee. But then, she lifted her head, and I saw her eyes. Not just the usual hunger or fear you see in lost dogs, but something else, pleading. She took a step forward, hesitated, and then backed away. That's when I noticed the others. Barely visible in the dim light of my porch, nestled in a shallow dip in the ground near the steps, were 5 tiny bodies. Puppies, huddled together, shivering, waiting. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen stray dogs before, sure, but never a mother coming to a person's door asking for help. And that's what she was doing. She wasn't barking, she wasn't growling. Just standing there, waiting, hoping I'd understand. I crouched down slowly, reaching out my hand. She flinched but didn't run. Those eyes, those desperate, tired eyes locked onto mine, and I knew I couldn't walk away from this. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but one thing was clear. She had chosen me. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the air was still heavy, clinging to my skin as I knelt on the porch. Rosie, because that's what I decided to call her in that moment, watched me, her body tense but unmoving. The puppies, curled in a tight little pile, whimpered softly, their tiny sides rising and falling with shuddering breaths. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, their fur still patchy, their eyes barely open to the world. I didn't rush. Moving too fast would only scare her off, and I had the feeling she was running on pure exhaustion. I went inside, grabbed an old towel and the leftover chicken I had in the fridge. When I stepped back out, she was still there, her body half turned as if ready to flee, but she hadn't left. I set the food down and backed away. It only took seconds before she took a cautious step forward, sniffed the air, then lowered her head and started eating. Fast, like she wasn't sure when her next meal would come. The puppies stirred at the sound, some stretching out their tiny legs, others letting out weak little yelps. Rosie immediately turned back to them, licking their heads, making sure they were still there. That's when I saw just how thin she really was. Her ribs jutted out like the frame of an old barn, her coat patchy with dirt and neglect. How long had she been on her own? How many doors had she tried before mine? I exhaled, rubbing the back of my neck. I hadn't planned on taking in a dog, let alone 6. I had enough to handle on my own, just me and this old house, the quiet days blending into one another. But looking at her now, at the way she curled her body around her puppies, protecting them even as she starved, I knew I had no choice. "All right, girl," I muttered, crouching down again. "Let's get you inside." I didn't expect her to listen, but when I picked up the first puppy, she just stood there watching, not growling, not panicking, trusting. That's when I knew she really had come here to ask for help, and I wasn't about to turn her away. Bringing them inside was the easy part. Earning their trust, that was something else entirely. The old house had always been quiet, just the sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional creak of the wooden floors. But now, the air was thick with something different, uncertainty. Rosie stuck close to the doorway, her body low to the ground, ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. The puppies, still too weak to care, lay bundled together in the towel I had spread out near the fireplace. They barely stirred as I dried them off, their tiny bellies round, despite Rosie's clear malnourishment. Whatever scraps she'd been finding, she had given to them first. I set out a bowl of water and another plate of food, keeping my distance as Rosie sniffed the offerings. She was wary, her tail tucked, her eyes darting between me and the door. If I made one wrong move, she could bolt. I sat down on the floor, slow and careful, trying to make myself smaller, less threatening. "You're safe now," I said, my voice quiet. I wasn't sure if I was saying it for her or for myself. She didn't come closer, but she didn't run either. That was enough for now. The puppies, though, were a different story. As the night stretched on, their little personalities started to show. Boone, the biggest of the bunch, was the first to wobble toward me, sniffing at my fingers before collapsing onto my leg like I was just another piece of furniture. Daisy followed, her tiny tail twitching as she nuzzled into my sleeve. The others weren't far behind. One by one, they climbed onto me, burrowing into the warmth of my shirt, their trust given without hesitation. Rosie, though, stayed back. Even as her babies curled up against me, even as they yawned and stretched and made themselves at home, she kept her distance. I could see the conflict in her eyes, wanting to be near them, but unsure about the man who had suddenly entered their lives. I didn't push. Trust wasn't something you could force. I stayed there, sitting on the floor, the fire casting flickering shadows across the walls. The house smelled of damp fur and wood smoke, of something new settling in among the old. And as Rosie finally curled up in the farthest corner, her eyes never leaving me, I realized this wasn't just about giving them shelter. This was about proving to her that I wasn't going anywhere. I woke up to a sound that sent ice through my veins, a sharp, panicked yelp. The fire had burned low, the embers casting a dull red glow across the room. The puppies were still curled up beside me, their tiny bodies rising and falling in sleep. But Rosie was standing now, her ears pricked, her body rigid. Another sound came, this time from outside, a rustling, followed by the unmistakable snap of a twig. Moving carefully, I tried not to wake the pups as I pushed myself to my feet. Rosie let out a low growl, her hackles rising. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the front door. My breath slowed, my mind racing through the possibilities. Out here in the middle of nowhere, the only visitors I got were the ones I invited, and I hadn't invited anyone. I crept toward the window, peering through the old warped glass. At first, I saw nothing, just the dark outline of trees, the gravel road disappearing into the distance. Then, in the dim glow of the porch light, something moved. A shadow. Someone was out there. Rosie growled again, deeper this time, her body tense as she pressed herself between me and the door. Whoever it was, she didn't trust them, and neither did I. My pulse hammered in my ears as I cracked the door open, just enough to see outside. The night was still, the wind stirring the leaves, carrying a distant scent of damp earth. The darkness played tricks on my eyes, but then, just beyond the steps, I saw it. Something small, sitting on the porch like it had been placed there on purpose. I frowned, stepping forward. Rosie barked sharply, as if warning me not to go any closer, but I had to see for myself. Kneeling down, I reached for the object, fingers brushing against the cold, rough plastic of a crate. The moment the porch light fully illuminated it, my stomach twisted. Inside, huddled in the corner, was another puppy, smaller than Rosie's, barely half their size, its frail body trembling violently. Its fur was damp and matted with dirt, and tied loosely around its tiny neck, almost as if it had been done in a rush, was a ragged red ribbon. This wasn't just some stray that had wandered up on its own. Someone had left it here. The question that sent an uneasy chill through my bones wasn't just why, but who. Rosie's bark cut through the night like a warning shot, her body tense as she positioned herself between me and the crate. The moment I lifted the plastic latch, the tiny puppy inside flinched, pressing itself against the back wall like it was trying to disappear. Its ribs jutted out beneath the matted fur, and its eyes, too wide for its small face, were filled with something I'd seen before. Not just fear, resignation. I exhaled slowly, trying to push down the unease creeping up my spine. This wasn't just an abandoned pup. Someone had made sure it got here. Someone had set it on my porch in the middle of the night and disappeared without a word. I glanced back toward the trees, half expecting to see a figure lingering in the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the wind rustling through the leaves, the distant hum of crickets, and Rosie's steady, low growl. Carefully, I reached inside the crate, keeping my movements slow. The puppy shrank back, but didn't bite, didn't struggle, just trembled against my fingers as I lifted it out. It was freezing, lighter than it should have been. I could feel the sharp bones beneath its skin, the frailty of something that had gone too long without a proper meal. It was nothing but a scrap of life, but even then, it clung to the warmth of my hands as if instinctively seeking comfort. Rosie's growl softened, but she stayed where she was, her eyes fixed on the tiny creature. The puppies behind her stirred, their small bodies shifting in sleep, oblivious to the new arrival. I stepped back inside, nudging the door shut with my foot, but Rosie didn't move until I knelt down again. Her gaze flicked between me and the puppy in my hands, the conflict in her eyes clear. "I didn't bring it here," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "But I guess it's ours now." She hesitated, then stepped forward, her nose twitching as she sniffed the small bundle in my hands. Her body relaxed, if only slightly, and that's when I knew she recognized something in this pup. Maybe it wasn't hers, but it had been left behind just like she had, a stray carrying another stray. I set the pup down carefully beside the others, watching as it curled in on itself, too exhausted to resist. Rosie licked its tiny head once, just a single tentative gesture, then turned her gaze back to me. I had taken in 6 dogs that night. Now I had 7, and somewhere out there, someone had made sure of that. Morning came slowly, the sky shifting from deep blue to a muted gray as the first light filtered through the trees. I hadn't slept much. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind circled back to that crate on my porch, to the tiny pup curled beside Rosie's litter. The question gnawed at me: who had left it there, and why? Rosie had finally settled, though she still kept a wary eye on me as I moved around the house. The puppies, including the new arrival, were huddled together near the old towel I had laid out for them, their small bodies pressed into the warmth of one another. I crouched beside them, rubbing the sleep from my face, and studied the newest one. It was smaller, weaker. The others had started squirming toward Rosie in the night, nudging at her belly, but this one had barely moved. I didn't know if it was just exhaustion or something worse. I needed answers, and I needed help. I reached for my phone and scrolled to the one person I knew would pick up no matter what: Eli. He was a local vet and an old friend, the kind of guy who'd patch up a stray without asking too many questions. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy. "Jake, you know what time it is?" "Yeah," I said, glancing at the clock. "Listen, I need a favor." A pause, then the sound of him sitting up. "What kind of favor?" "The kind that barks," I muttered. "A mother dog showed up on my porch last night. 5 pups, and then someone—" I hesitated, the memory of that plastic crate sending another wave of unease through me. "Someone left another one outside my door, middle of the night, just dropped it and disappeared." Silence stretched between us. Then Eli sighed. "All right, I'll be there in an hour." By the time he arrived, the house smelled of coffee and damp fur. Rosie tensed as the door opened, stepping in front of her litter, but Eli had a way with animals. He crouched low, his movements slow, and waited. After a moment, she sniffed the air, then let out a soft huff and laid back down, though her eyes never left him. "Damn," Eli muttered, running a hand through his hair as he took in the sight of them. "She's been through it." He knelt beside the puppies, his experienced hands checking each one carefully. When he reached the newcomer, his brow furrowed. "This one's not from the same litter. You see the size difference? The fur?" I nodded. "I know, but someone wanted it here." Eli didn't say anything, just kept working, his fingers running over the tiny ribs, the delicate bones beneath thin skin. Finally, he looked up at me. "It's weak, malnourished, could be sick, could just need a little time, but it's a toss-up. We'll do what we can." I rubbed the back of my neck. "And the others? They're lucky. Could have gone another day or 2 without food, but they're fighters." He glanced at Rosie, his voice softer. "She kept them alive, even if it meant starving herself." Something in me clenched at that. I glanced at her, at the way she curled protectively around the pile of fur at her side, even the strange new pup. Eli packed up his kit and stood. "I'll bring by some formula for the little one, just in case." "But Jake," he hesitated. "Who do you think left it?" I didn't have an answer. I just knew this wasn't over. Someone had come in the dead of night to place that crate on my porch. And if they had done it once, there was no telling what else they were capable of. Eli left not long after, promising to check in later with supplies, but his last question lingered in my mind. Who had left that puppy on my porch, and why didn't they just knock? The mystery of it settled in my chest like a weight, but I had more pressing concerns right now. Rosie and her pups. The little one, the one with the red ribbon, still hadn't moved much. While the others wriggled and nuzzled closer to Rosie, this one lay curled up on its own, breathing slow, almost too slow. I dipped a finger into the warm formula Eli had left, brushing it against its tiny mouth. At first, nothing. Then a faint flicker of a tongue, the weakest attempt to latch on. It wasn't much, but it was something. Rosie watched me with quiet suspicion, her dark eyes unreadable. I knew she didn't fully trust me yet, not in the way her puppies did, but she hadn't stopped me either. That meant something. I moved carefully, settling down near her but not too close, giving her space. I wanted her to know that I wasn't here to take them from her. I was here to help. Hours passed, and in that time, something unexpected happened. I started feeling responsible. I'd told myself this was temporary, that I was just making sure they were safe, that I'd figure out a plan. But sitting here on the worn wooden floor, watching Rosie curl around her pups, the tiny whimpers filling the quiet house, I knew that was a lie. This wasn't temporary. I had always lived alone, always preferred it that way, but suddenly the thought of an empty house felt colder than it ever had before. The puppies, even the weak one, had turned my quiet space into something different, something alive. And Rosie, despite her caution, had chosen my porch, my home, as her last chance. The real question was I ready for that kind of commitment? Taking them in meant more than just feeding them. It meant responsibility. It meant vet bills, training, finding them homes, and possibly failing at all of it. And more than that, it meant caring, really caring, knowing that I might not be able to keep them forever. Rosie lifted her head and met my eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Maybe she knew what I was thinking. Maybe she was asking the same thing. What happens now? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. I wasn't walking away. The next few days settled into an uneasy routine. Rosie was eating more, her ribs less pronounced beneath her golden fur, and the puppies had started exploring in wobbly steps. Even the smallest one, the one with the red ribbon, had gained a little strength, though it still wasn't keeping up with the others. I made sure to bottle feed it every few hours, cradling its fragile body in my hands as it struggled to drink. Rosie watched every time, never intervening, but I could feel the shift. She was starting to trust me. But just as things felt like they were stabilizing, the unease in my gut returned. It started with something small. The second night after Eli's visit, I found the gate to my property unlatched. At first, I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness, but by the third time, I knew better. Someone had been here. I started keeping my shotgun by the door, not because I wanted trouble, but because I wasn't about to be caught off guard. Out here, people didn't just wander onto your land. If someone was sneaking around, they had a reason, and that reason had something to do with Rosie and her pups. The breaking point came on the fourth night. I had just finished feeding the smallest pup and was settling down in my chair when Rosie shot up, ears perked, body rigid. A second later, she let out a deep, guttural growl, one I hadn't heard from her before. The puppies stirred, sensing her alarm, their tiny bodies pressing close to her warmth. I stood up, my pulse quickening, straining to listen. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, just outside the house. My fingers tightened around the shotgun as I moved toward the window, my breath shallow. The porch light cast a dim glow over the yard, and for a long moment I saw nothing. Then, movement, a shadow slipping between the trees at the edge of my property. "Hey!" I called out, stepping onto the porch, my voice cutting through the silence. No answer. Just the sound of footsteps retreating into the woods. Rosie barked, her body tense beside me, but whoever it was, they were already gone. I stood there for a long time, staring into the darkness, my grip firm on the shotgun. This wasn't just someone passing through. Someone had been watching, and if they had come once, they'd come again. I turned back to the house, my chest tight. The puppies were safe for now. But Rosie and I both knew we weren't alone out here anymore. The next morning, I found footprints. They weren't mine, and they sure as hell weren't Eli's. They were fresh, pressed into the damp earth just beyond the porch. Too big for a coyote, too deliberate to be from someone just passing through. Someone had been standing there, watching. The thought made my stomach tighten. Rosie had been restless all night, her ears twitching at every creak of the house. She stuck close to the puppies, her body curled around them like a barrier. Even now, as I stood on the porch staring at those footprints, she was at my heels, her dark eyes locked onto the same spot. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my jaw. "I don't like it either." I snapped a few pictures with my phone, sent them to Eli. "Someone was here last night, found tracks. Same person who left the pup." He called back almost immediately. "You need to file a report, Jake." I exhaled, running a hand over the back of my neck. What the hell am I supposed to tell them? That some mystery person is trespassing and leaving puppies on my porch? "Yeah," he said flatly. because that's exactly what's happening. I wanted to argue, but he wasn't wrong. It wasn't just about the dogs anymore. Someone had been close, too close, and if they were watching, it meant they had an interest in these animals. That was what unsettled me the most. Instead of calling the sheriff right away, I walked the property, scanning for more signs. A few broken branches along the tree line, some disturbed dirt near the fence. Small things, but enough to tell me someone had lingered longer than I was comfortable with. When I got back to the house, Rosie was waiting by the door, the puppies still piled together in the makeshift bed I'd set up near the fireplace. The smallest one, the one with the red ribbon, stirred weakly, but at least it was still holding on. I crouched down beside them, letting my fingers brush over the soft fur of Boone and Daisy, the strongest of the bunch. It had only been a few days, but I already knew them, knew their quirks. The way Scout was always the first to yawn, the way Millie tucked herself beneath her siblings when she slept. And then there was Rosie. She wasn't just watching over them anymore, she was watching me too. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by something else. Recognition, maybe even trust. I sighed and leaned back against the wall. Guess we're in this together now, huh? She blinked at me, then slowly, hesitantly, rested her head against my knee. It was small, barely a touch, but it meant everything. I had taken them in, thinking I was helping them. But sitting there, surrounded by these tiny lives depending on me, I started wondering if I needed them just as much as they needed me. Still, trust didn't solve the bigger problem. Someone out there wasn't done with us yet. And I had a bad feeling that whatever came next, I wouldn't be ready for it. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, I had come to a decision. I couldn't just sit around waiting for whoever was sneaking onto my land to make their next move. I needed answers. Rosie and the pups were safe inside, curled up in the warm glow of the fireplace, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. I loaded up the truck and drove into town, stopping first at Eli's clinic. He took one look at me and sighed. "You look like hell." "Yeah, well, not much sleep lately," I muttered, leaning against the counter. "I need to know if anyone's been looking for a missing dog. A mother, a litter of puppies." Eli frowned. "You think someone's trying to take them back?" I don't know what to think. I ran a hand through my hair. But someone left that last pup on my porch like they wanted me to find it. And someone's been sneaking around my property at night. Whoever they are, they've got a reason for all this. Eli sighed and pulled out a clipboard, flipping through a few pages before shaking his head. "No missing dog reports in the past month, and no one's called about a stray mother either." He hesitated. "You think this is more than just someone abandoning them?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out." I left the clinic with more questions than answers. If no one was looking for Rosie, then who had left her pup, and why? The sheriff's office was my next stop. I wasn't expecting much, but if someone was creeping around my place, I figured it wouldn't hurt to put it on record. The deputy at the front desk barely glanced up when I walked in. "What can I do for you?" I laid it out simple. Strange footprints, unlatched gate, a puppy left in the dead of night. It sounded insane even as I said it, but the longer I talked, the more the deputy's bored expression shifted into something else. "You live out on Mill Creek Road, right?" he asked, leaning forward. I stiffened. "Yeah." The deputy exchanged a glance with the officer beside him, then lowered his voice. "Couple weeks back, we got a call from an old farmer out that way. Said he saw someone lurking near his barn late at night, but by the time we got there, they were gone. Didn't think much of it, figured it was just a drifter." He tapped his pen against the desk. "You think this has something to do with your dogs?" "I don't believe in coincidences," I said, crossing my arms. He nodded slowly. "We'll send someone out to patrol near your place tonight. Might be nothing, but keep your doors locked. And if you see anything, call us." That didn't exactly put me at ease, but it was something. By the time I made it back home, the sky had turned an inky black. The house was quiet, but the moment I stepped onto the porch, Rosie let out a sharp bark from inside. I tensed, unlocking the door in a hurry. The moment I stepped in, I knew something was wrong. Rosie wasn't with the puppies. She was standing near the back door, her body stiff, her ears pulled back. I followed her gaze to the floor. Dirt scattered near the entrance. The door had been locked when I left, but someone had been inside. And worse, one of the puppies was missing. My pulse slammed in my ears as my eyes swept the room. The puppies were still huddled in their makeshift bed, but I could see it instantly. One was missing. My stomach clenched. The red-ribboned pup. Rosie let out a low, anxious whine, pacing toward the back door. My brain struggled to catch up, but everything was moving too fast. The door was still locked. The windows were latched. Yet somehow someone had gotten in, taken that tiny, fragile pup, and vanished without a trace. I grabbed my shotgun from where it rested against the wall, threw the door open, and stepped out into the cold night air. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees, making every shifting shadow feel like a threat. I moved fast, boots crunching against the dirt as I scanned the yard, my breath coming hard and fast. Then I saw it, movement near the tree line. I didn't hesitate. I bolted toward it, gripping the gun tight, my heart hammering as I closed the distance. Whoever it was, they were running now, slipping through the thick brush, a dark figure disappearing into the trees. "Hey!" I bellowed, my voice cutting through the night. "Stop!" But they didn't stop. I crashed through the undergrowth, branches slashing against my arms, my breath ragged. The flashlight beam bounced wildly in front of me, catching glimpses of movement, a flicker of fabric, a footstep in the dirt. Whoever this was, they knew these woods. They were fast, too fast, and before I could close the distance, they were gone. I came to a stop, cursing under my breath, my chest heaving. The only sound was the wind rattling through the trees, the distant call of an owl, and then something else, a faint, pitiful whimper. I turned sharply, scanning the darkness. The sound had come from somewhere close. I took a cautious step forward, then another. The beam of my flashlight swept across the underbrush, and then I saw it. The red ribbon. The tiny puppy lay just beyond the path, curled up in a tight ball, shaking violently. Whoever had taken it hadn't gotten far before they'd abandoned it. But why? Why go through the trouble of sneaking onto my property, taking a single puppy, and then dropping it in the middle of the woods? I crouched down, carefully scooping the trembling pup into my hands. Its breathing was shallow, its body colder than it should have been. It was weak, too weak. I didn't waste another second. I turned and ran back to the house, Rosie meeting me at the door with wide, frantic eyes. She sniffed the pup the moment I knelt down, then let out a soft, relieved sound before licking its tiny head. I wasn't relieved yet. This wasn't over. Someone had come into my house, taken this pup, led me into the woods on purpose, and now they knew that I was willing to chase them. I didn't sleep that night. Rosie stayed curled around the puppies, pressing the red-ribboned pup close to her warmth, her body protective, her eyes flicking toward the door every time the wind rattled the frame. I sat in my chair, shotgun resting across my lap, staring at the door just like she was. Whoever had come into my house had done it quietly, without force, without breaking anything. That meant they either knew the locks or they knew how to pick them. And that meant they could come back. Eli called just before dawn. "Jesus, Jake, are you serious? Someone actually got inside?" His voice was tight with anger, sharper than I'd heard it before. "Yeah," I muttered, rubbing my temple. "And they took the smallest pup. I found it in the woods." Silence stretched between us before he finally said, "This isn't just about the dogs, is it?" I knew what he meant. This wasn't some careless person dumping a litter. This was deliberate. A message. I exhaled. "No, it's not." Eli sighed heavily on the other end of the line. "Look, I did some digging last night after you left. There's no missing dog reports, but I found something else. You remember that old dog fighting ring that got busted up a few towns over a couple years back?" I frowned. "Yeah, what about it?" "They never caught everyone involved. Some of them just scattered, went underground. If this is connected..." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Jake, if Rosie was part of that, or if these pups belong to someone who's still in the game..." I clenched my jaw. "You're saying someone wants them back. I'm saying someone thinks those dogs belong to them." The words settled like lead in my stomach. I looked over at Rosie, at the way she curled protectively around her puppies, ears twitching even in her sleep. If she had come from that world, if she had escaped with her litter, then someone out there wanted her back, and they weren't going to stop. I stood up, gripping the shotgun tighter. "Then they're in for a fight," Eli cursed under his breath. Don't do anything stupid." I didn't answer. Instead, I ended the call, locked every door, and started checking the windows. If they wanted to come back, fine. Let them try. But this time I'd be waiting. The night was different this time. The air was too still, the woods too quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I sat near the door, shotgun loaded, every light in the house off except for the faint glow of embers in the fireplace. Rosie was awake too, her body curled around the puppies but her ears flicking at every little sound. She knew something was coming, just like I did. I didn't know how they would come, if they'd knock, if they'd try sneaking in again, or if they'd bring something worse. But I knew they were coming. The footprints, the missing pup, the way they had tested my patience, it was all leading up to this moment. And then, just past midnight, the first sound came. A slow, deliberate creak of the porch boards. Not the wind, not an animal. Someone was out there. I tightened my grip on the shotgun, steadying my breath as adrenaline surged through my veins. A shadow moved beyond the window, barely visible in the moonlight. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They were waiting, listening, maybe even daring me to make the first move. Rosie let out a low growl, so quiet it barely disturbed the air, but it was enough. A response came almost instantly. A knock, soft but deliberate, like the person on the other side wanted to remind me that this wasn't over. I stayed where I was, my muscles tense. Another knock followed, and then a voice. Low, rough, male. "Come on out, friend. Just here for what's mine." The way he said it, so casual, so assured, sent a slow burn of anger through my chest. I glanced at Rosie. She hadn't moved from the pups, but her eyes gleamed with something primal, something that told me she knew that voice. Stepping to the side of the door, keeping out of direct view, I forced my voice to remain steady. "Ain't nothing here for you." The man let out a slow, humorless chuckle. "That's where you're wrong." There was a shuffle, boots scraping against the wood, shifting weight. He was testing me, waiting to see if I'd cave, if I'd open the door and hand over Rosie and her pups without a fight. He had no idea who he was dealing with. "I'm giving you one chance," I said, my voice low and firm. "Turn around, get back in your truck, and don't come back." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, a sigh. "Guess it's gonna be the hard way then." The door handle rattled, followed by a heavier thud, a shoulder hitting the wood, testing its strength. I raised the shotgun, stepping carefully near the window, ready for whatever came next. Another hit landed, harder this time, but the old door held. Then I saw it. A second figure creeping toward the side of the house, heading for the back door. My heart pounded as I moved fast, rounding the corner just as a shadowy figure reached for the latch. I didn't hesitate. My shotgun was up before he even had a chance to react. "Try it," I growled. The man froze, his hands lifting slightly, a flicker of hesitation in his stance. He wasn't expecting me to be ready. The other man must have heard the shift in energy because the knocking at the front stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the first man called out, voice tight, "You don't know what you're messing with." I stepped forward just enough for the porch light to catch my face. "Neither do you." Something passed between us in that moment, an understanding, a realization that neither of us was going to back down. He had come expecting a soft target, maybe a man who would fold at the first sign of a fight. But I wasn't that man, and he knew it now. A long, tense silence stretched, then a sharp whistle cut through the air. The second figure backed up, slow and deliberate, before disappearing into the shadows. A moment later, footsteps crunched on the gravel, a truck door slammed, and tires spit dirt as they peeled away down the road. I stayed where I was, watching the red glow of taillights disappear into the night, waiting to be sure they were really gone before lowering the shotgun. Rosie let out a breath beside me, not a whimper, not a growl, just a release of tension, as if she knew the fight had passed, for now. I turned back toward the house, exhaling slowly. I had won this round, but I also knew this wasn't the last time they'd come looking. The house felt different after that night. The air inside, once filled with restless uncertainty, had settled into something heavier, something that clung to the walls and the space between each breath. Rosie stayed close to the pups, her body curled around them, but her eyes followed me differently now. There was no more suspicion, no more hesitation. She had seen what I was willing to do to protect them. I kept the shotgun by the door, locked every window, and reinforced the back latch. Eli came by the next morning, took one look at me, and shook his head. "So what now?" he asked, setting down a bag of supplies for the pups. "You calling the sheriff again?" I hesitated before answering. The truth was, I didn't know what came next. Whoever those men were, they hadn't come back, but that didn't mean they wouldn't. If Rosie had been tied to something ugly, something that still had unfinished business, then we weren't out of danger. But calling the sheriff wouldn't fix that. The law had its limits out here, and men like the ones who came for Rosie knew that all too well. Instead of answering, I crouched down, running a hand over the smallest pup, the one with the red ribbon. It had survived against the odds, weaker than the others but stubborn enough to keep holding on. Rosie licked the top of its tiny head and then nudged my hand with her nose, a quiet kind of gratitude. I let out a slow breath. "I'm not sending them anywhere," I said finally. "Not unless it's somewhere safe, somewhere permanent." Eli leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You saying you're keeping them?" I let the question hang there for a moment, letting the weight of it settle in my chest. I had never planned for this. Hadn't thought I was the kind of man who could take in a family of strays and make it work. But the silence in the house before they arrived, the way the loneliness had stretched out long and endless, there was no going back to that now. I looked at Rosie, at the way she had come to trust me, and I knew. "I guess I am," I said. Eli huffed out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Hell of a way to get a dog," I smirked, scratching behind Rosie's ears. She picked me first. The pups squirmed, their tiny bodies pressing together in warmth, their small futures still unwritten. Maybe it wasn't how I thought life would go. Maybe there were still shadows at the edges of this story. But one thing was clear. I wasn't alone anymore. And neither were they. Rescue isn't always about picking up a stray and giving it food. Sometimes it's about trust. It's about understanding that broken things take time to heal, that scars don't fade overnight, and that the ones who have suffered the most often struggle the hardest to believe they're finally safe. Rosie came to my porch looking for help, but maybe in some way I needed her just as much as she needed me. This story isn't just about one dog or one man. It's about the choices we make when life throws something unexpected in our path. It's about standing up for the ones who can't fight for themselves. About realizing that family isn't always the one you're born into, but the one you choose. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the responsibility we all have toward the animals who trust us, then I hope you'll stick around. There's always another story to tell, another life that needs saving. And who knows, maybe one day you'll find yourself in a moment just like this, with a choice that could change everything. If you want to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and filled with moments that make us think, be sure to subscribe. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it, because you never know who it might inspire. And if you've ever rescued an animal or had an experience like this, drop your story in the comments. Let's keep this conversation going, because sometimes the ones we save end up saving us right back.